Living my bucolic life, we have the city strife. Horses, chicks, and dogs, they are my neighbors. I cook and sell and spin, and move the horses into the barn. Then time to move them out again. Red barns, green pastures, beautiful white houses. The view I see each day when I arise. This life pleases me, as it is plain to see. I'm living my bucolic life.
Hello, and welcome to part 2 of this pattern here, the little vintage Vogue bathing suit and cover-up pattern. Now, in part 1, I made the cover-up, which you'll see in the background as we do this. And in this one, I'm going to be making this version here in the green. What I can tell is the difference between the different tops is that this one here has more of a band underneath it. And I'm thinking that if I make this and it fits me up here, but I'm really conscientious about my belly, I can always add a little floofy curtain kind of thing to that band. So anyhow, there's a bra part and there are shorts. And this is not using elastic or spandex or anything stretchy in it. They suggested denim, gingham, broadcloth, poplin, okay, things like that. So I am using this fabric, which is the scraps that I had left over from that tucked, pink tuck dress that we did a month or so ago. And I think it's a good canvasy type 100% cotton fabric for it. And for the lining, because there's a fabric and a lining, and this is becoming a stash buster type of project. I have some white broadcloth that was in my stash that I cut up for most of the linings in the bra, and then I had a washed piece of muslin that I'm using for the lining for the shorts. So, but the outside will look the same. The outside of them will all look like this. So let's get started. The first part I'm going to do is the bra. Now, I am assuming that there is a pretty close to 0 amount of ease in this. And so I actually cut a size larger than I usually do, because usually there's extra ease to play with and I end up sizing down. But just to be safe, I'm cutting out an 18 in my pattern, whereas I usually cut a 16. So if there is 0 ease, it should fit me in my bust, it should fit me at my hips, but my waist, the waist is going to be too big because I'm more hourglassy in this shape. And this is a little fun thing. It shows what body shapes it's good for. So apparently it's good for everybody. So there you go. So anyhow, I may have to make some adjustments in the waist, but that's probably just going to be a dart or something, so that won't be bad. So all that aside, let's get started with the bra. Okay, so we are starting with piece number 1 on the bra. And like always, I am punching out these circles in my pattern with my little hole punch and my piece of leather. And hang on a sec. Well, there's more of them, but I'll get to those. And then I can just come back and color in those holes with my heat erasable pen, so that when I'm ironing, they'll just disappear. But that way I get really easy, fast, accurate markings for all of my dots. Now on this piece number 1, it's part of the front bra. There's a lot of dots. There's up here where it looks like we're joining the tie strap. Down here, there's pleat ones, the center front, lower center front. So lots of circles, notches. So I'm going to take a minute because I have to mark the 2 for the garment and the 2 for the lining. Okay, so this same thing I'm going to be doing with this fabric and this one. This is the lining. So what it is there are these pleats. I need to make this pleat. So you take the two smaller dots, fold it, and bring them up to match the two top dots. I'm just going to stick a pin right there. So they want it so that the fold is, you know, like this, all right? And they also want you to baste across here all the way to this top point. So you're not going all the way to the end like a dart, but just basting the pleat up to there. Okay, so I am basting these pleats on my machine, but I'm not backstitching at the end because I'm still thinking that at some point I'm going to be pulling these basting stitches out. So I'm just going to leave them, you know, like that for right now. So the way I'm doing it is I'm just putting that on my machine here and where I can see where this dot is, and on the fabric piece, if you can't see it, it actually is easier if you mark your fabric on the right side instead of the wrong side for these pleat parts. Oopsie, got it in reverse here. So I'm just running it along here until I get to that second dot and pulling it out, so it's just like that. Okay, so between where these pleats are, that's the center front. So I'm going to match those up, and what it says is I need to make this seam here, and all of these dots are on the seam allowance. So I'll just start at the bottom, come all the way up, but stop here. There's a top circle, and that's where I need to stop. So I'm going to sew that on my fabric and on my lining. Okay, I just read the instructions, and for view A that didn't have a band, you sew the whole way up, but for view B, there's these two little circles here, and you're actually supposed to have the stitches open between those two little circles. So I'm just going to go ahead and open that back up again here. There, now those are open, but unfortunately I do have to actually come back to the machine so I can reinforce these ends so that they don't unravel on me, but just wanted to point that out. Alright, so it's sewed together. Here's my little opening right here, and this is my center front. So I'm going to set that piece aside for a minute, and we are going to work on piece number 2. And it's the same thing. It has a dart that we're going to need to mark on all 4 pieces of fabric, and then to go ahead and make that dart. Okay. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and start pinning my darts, and the way I do it is I put my pin down through one dot, back up through the corresponding dot, and do that for this one over here. And up here at the very tip, I'm just going to catch one thread or maybe 2. Alright, so now I can just push all of this together, and it's going to give me the fold line that they create. Okay, so I can tuck this guy in, can tuck this guy in, and I'm just going to move this one just at the apex. I'm just going to shift it over here so it's going straight down. Alright, now I always start sewing it at the outside edge and come in. So I am going to also go ahead and draw my stitching line because I can. And I will do that on all 4 pieces. So the first thing after I've sewn it is I'm going to press my dart flat. It sets those stitches and it erases all of my marks, which is nice. And then this dart is going to be folded towards the bottom. So I'm just going to tuck it in here. Just like that. So that's how I'm going to press all of these darts so they are aimed at the bottom. Okay, so now I am sewing the bra centers right here to the side of the cup that I just now pressed the dart down on. So say on this side here, I want to make sure that my bottoms are both on the bottom, and there's a dot up here at the top. Then I'm going to make sure that I line that up too. I know that that dot is technically for placing the strap, but I can also use it as a guide to make sure I have everything lined up correctly. So actually they sew together, not they sew, but they place together very well. There's not really any easing or anything that you need to do here. I'm making sure my bottom edge lined up. And then just gonna match the middle. There are some notches here to match. They're not really that necessary in my opinion, because once you get the middle, everything just falls into place. So you can see it's just going to curve in there really nicely. So I'm going to do that, sew this at 5/8 again, and the same thing with the lining. Alright, so I need to press these seams open that go right over the bust. So I am using my ham, that was made during my how to make a pressing ham video. And it comes in really handy for things like this. So first thing I'm going to do is deal with this little top part. Now, if yours fabric is too bulky, you can always cut little notches out of it, but I don't think that it's that bad. I think that it'll be just fine, actually. So anyway, if you don't have a pressing ham, they're nice. If you want to make one, the kind that I make have a flat bottom on them so they can stand up on their own, and they're very handy too. So I'm going to finish pressing these open and go on to the next step. Okay, so the next piece I'm going to be dealing with is this bra back piece. And it does have a marking for some button and buttonhole placement, but I'm actually not going to transfer these yet, because I want to get this piece sewed on here and kind of do a slight fitting onto my dress form just to see if there's any major adjustments. And I will probably just be lengthening or shortening this piece for the adjustments, because I just placed this over my dress form just to get a look and see if the cup size is going to work, and I think it is. So I'm feeling pretty good about this part. But I have a feeling that if anything, I'll have to adjust this. So long story short, I'm not marking the center back, and I'm not marking these two right now, just because that may change a little bit one way or another. But there is there's markings for a strap for A. A is more like a traditional bra with a strap that comes over your shoulder. I'm doing the halter top one, so I'm not going to be marking that. So really, it's just this part, this little square down here, which is just going to be on the seam line. So I'm going to go ahead and sew these on. Good morning. Ooh, you're crooked. Hang on a second. All right, that's a little bit better. So, new day, and I have the sides on, and I just basically, oh, excuse my wet hair, it is what it is, and if I try to blow dry it, I end up with an afro, so we don't go there. It'll get drier as we go. Anyway, back to the bra. I just wrapped it around my dress form just to see at this point how it's going to fit. And right now, it looks like this is my center front according to the pattern. It actually looks like my center front's going to be around here. So what that means to me is that I'm glad I picked the larger size, because I think I get a bigger cup size, which is what I want. But I think that the girth of the entire thing is a lot bigger than what I was expecting based on the size of the pattern. But because trying it on my dress form is not exactly the same as trying it on me, for one, and I am going to be putting a couple different button placement options, so there's a little bit of fudge factor, I am actually not going to try this on me until after I sew the lining to it, because there's some places on here that are cut on a bias, you know, and I don't want those to stretch out of shape. Once I put the lining onto it and I sew that lining on, I know that all those edges are locked in. Then I can pull it around me and make sure that it's going to hug me nice and tight and everything, so you know nothing's going to fall off or gape. But I don't want to do that till I have those stitches all secured. So let's get started putting it together. Alrighty, so because I'm doing the view that has the band down here, I'm not actually going to be sewing these together down here. If you're doing the view that does not, you know, you go all the way around and then flip it. So I'm just going to match up all of my points. So I will basically be sewing just straight up and then come in and follow the contours of it at a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Okay, so I'm going to be very careful that my seam allowances stay pressed open in these cups, and I'm coming around and see how close we can get to where these stitches, remember we didn't sew above this dot in the center front, so this can kind of flail open. So I'm going to try to aim right at that point. So right there, that's where I'm aiming at. And I'm actually going to back stitch it once when I get here, just because I make sure I'm going to cross over the line and start back up this side, making sure I'm still at my 5/8 seam allowance. Okay, so I have it sewn all the way around. You can see on the lining side a little bit better. And I went ahead, you know, took off everything and tried it on because, you know, no bras in the underneath. And this is where the two met, all right? So this is where I would consider my center back to be. So before I do anything else, what I'm going to do is, like on the pattern, if this is their center back and this is my center back, I want to keep the same button placement, but I'm basically going to be making this my new end piece. So I'm just going to chop that off, okay, and sew my stitch coming down here. Okay, so I've got these ends shortened and sewn. And there's one other thing. When I tried it on, my poor girls were drooping. There is nothing here to support them. You know, it's a wrap, but, you know, time, gravity, and everything else. And they look sad. They look sad. So, you know, it doesn't call for it. I'm throwing some rigilene in there. Rigilene, it's a kind of boning that you can just sew through. You don't necessarily need a casing for it. This is just a little piece of one. I think, actually, yeah, this one is clear. This is white. I think I'll use my clear. And what you do, you can put some medical tape. You can make a little end cap for them with a little scrap of fabric or something if you want to, just to make sure that nothing's going to poke through. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put it on the sides, and I'm going to put it along this front cup. And I'm going to be sewing it to the lining side. So first I'm going to cut myself 4 strips and finish off the top point, and that's just so that it's got all of these little individual little plastic things, and you don't want those to poke up into your armpit or something. So okay, so I've decided I'm just going to use my tape. You can use masking tape. I'm using a medical tape because it's water resistant, you know, swimming, stuff like that. So these are on a slant, and I'm going to want to put my boning right here on the side of this seam. I think that's going to give it a lot of support. So I'm just going to draw the slant of that seam there, cut this, So that way it's going to match up with that same slant. Let me see if I can get you closer so you can see it. Okay, now let me get a piece of tape. And the tape's going to do a couple things. One, it's going to keep the boning secure so that these little plastic channels don't want to come out. And also it's going to make it a little softer up underneath my armpit and everything. Okay, so I just have my little piece of tape around that. So now I can just lay that here and come back with my sewing machine. I'm going to sew down. You can either sew, if you can get your needle straight down and it's a hard enough needle, you can go straight down the middle, you know, or you can come down one side and down the other side. I might play with a scrap just to see what works best on this application after I get all of my little boning pieces cut. And you know, I actually need to make it so that I have my seam allowance down here. So if this is 5/8, I need to make the end of my boning stop right there. All right. So this goes across here. I take another little piece of tape. Fold it over down here and wrap it around. Okay, so there's one. So I'm going to do this same type of thing. The tops are pretty flat, so I don't really need to angle those, but I do need to make sure that I secure the top and bottom of the rigilene, and I make sure that it's the right length so that I still have a seam allowance down here with no boning in it. Okay, so I played with a couple things, and what I'm going to do is just sew straight down the center. I start at the top and work my way down. So I am just placing it below my stitching line, okay? And I'm sewing it on the lining part. It's not going to be on the seam's not going to show on the fashion fabric part, just on the lining part. And I'm just kind of laying my boning straight down that seam. I'm just going to go straight down the middle. And I have a size 14 needle in here. Okay, so now I have some support there so that when my cup has a lot of body to it there, so I'm going to have that there and on the side here, and I think between the two of those it's going to keep it from wanting to just collapse. So let me go ahead and do these other sides over here. Oh, and when I am clipping them and shaping them, I just clip the boning piece that I have to the appropriate channel. That way I can keep them straight, because every single one's going to be slightly different. So, alright, so I was so excited about fitting the rigilene into the bra that I completely forgot to put the strap on. Okay, so it's okay. I can make my strap, and then I'm just going to split a couple stitches in this seam here, insert it in, and then restitch that seam. It's not a big deal at this point. Okay, so I've got them folded in half, and these are also sewn at a 5/8 inch seam allowance. Just because turning something this narrow with that big of a seam allowance is kind of thick, and since there's not going to be a real strain on it, I am actually going to, instead of using my regular machine, I'm going to use my serger, because then it will trim off a lot of that extra bulk as I sew, and so when I go to turn it, it's going to be a lot less inside there to make it tricky. It looks like this basic long loop turner is the one that's going to work best for this one. It's got the little latch hook at the end, it's just a long wire. Mine has become curved over the years. But it looks like that's probably the easiest one to pull these things right side out, at least as far as what I have in my arsenal over here. So now that I have these turned, I need to iron them, and I'm going to iron it so that the seam is on one of the sides. I think that'll give it some nice strength. So let me go do that, and then we will put these on to the bikini top. So now I need to pull my little seam, my little strap through that opening, and I'm going to line it up right next to that seam. Come on, you're twisting in there. Okay, so now it's lined up right next to that seam. I'm going to close it up, stick a pin in there. And so now I just need to come back and re-sew this seam here and this seam here, and we should be ready to go on to the next step. Okay, now I need to trim before I turn this whole thing. So just taking some of that bulk off from around there. I'm not actually going to grade this, but what I am going to do is use my pinking shears, because if it's curved, that'll help. It'll take some of the bulk off, it'll help, and it'll, make it nicer to work with. So, especially up here where it's curved, it'll make that curve turn nicer too. Alright, so here she is so far, and the directions do not want you to understitch, they don't want you to top stitch, they just want you to turn and press it. So that's what I will do. I just have it turned, I haven't pressed it yet. After I have all of this pressed nicely, I need to come back and, with everything matched up carefully along the bottom edge, baste it across the bottom edge. Alright, so this is what we have so far, and I want to show you, there's this little hole that I had to make, remember when we were sewing it together? And I'm just pulling a little ribbon through here, because there's going to be a little tie that kind of cinches it together like that, which is going to make it fit a little different. So just sticking that little ribbon there for right now to give it the effect, okay? And right now I just have my little straps overlapped and pinned back here. Now I need to put the band on. The band is going to be about this deep that goes all the way around and everything, but it's kind of cute, I've got the boning in here, so this isn't going to want to sag. I've got boning right here, so hopefully that'll stay nice and tight. So yeah, I need to finish off the ends of these straps, but just wanted to show you. Lovely. I'm going to take it off and make this little tie, which is this little piece. Okay. Now, when I was cutting this little tie that's supposed to go there is supposed to be cut on the bias, but because I was making scraps fit, I could not find a bias place that I could cut this. So I just cut it on the straight, and I think that's going to be fine for just that. But anyway, let's go. Okay, I'm just going to get this tie out of the way real quick. So it's the same as for the straps, folding it in half. And again, they want you to do it at 5/8. So I am going to be using my serger and then turning it very carefully right side out, because this is going to be a very skinny little tube. It's going to be a true spaghetti strap. This is the interfacing that I'm going to be using for this band here. It says featherweight, which is kind of deceiving. It's actually more of a mid-weight type of interfacing. And so I'm going to go ahead and cut it, and it's one really long piece to be cut on the fold. Now remember, I did cut some off of my end because it was just too long at my end. So I'm going to go ahead and do the whole thing, and then at the point that I'm sewing it onto my bra part, then I'll just trim it to match up where that is. Okay, and because I am using an interfacing that is fairly thick, I'm going to adjust my interfacing so that I don't have any out in the seam allowances. It'll just make it less bulky when I'm sewing it. So if my seam allowances are 5/8 of an inch, okay, and this band, it's just a same width strip all the way down. what I need to do if I'm excluding two 5/8 inch seam allowances is take 1.25 inches off of that width. So let's say if this is 1.25 inches, then my width of my band is actually 2.25 inches that I need interfaced. Alright, so then with my edges of my interfacing lined up here nicely, I'm just going to draw a line at 2.25 inches and just cut that, and that should give me a piece of interfacing that's just going to fit nicely inside my strap. Alright, so this is a very long band, but the way that I apply my interfacing is first I iron my fabric to get any wrinkles out of it so it's nice and hot and flat. At that point, just the heat of it makes the fibers more relaxed and accepting of new things, which is what we're putting on here. And now I'm just going to be putting my interfacing down the very center. And for this one, this is a thicker interfacing, so I'm just ironing it straight on. And what I'm doing is just pressing, trying not to wiggle my iron so that the adhesive can just melt straight on there. Sometimes with lighter weight fabrics and thinner interfacing, I need to use a press cloth, but for this, it's going to be just fine. Okay, so now that that is done, I'm just going to flip it over to the right side and iron it again on the right side. And I use a steam iron. It's that moisture with the heat, with the pressure, that's going to get everything to fuse nicely. Alright, so I need to actually figure out exactly where my center, my placements are for my band, and since I adjusted it, I need to go ahead and mark that. So what I've done is I just folded my band in half and I have pinned that to the very front. So I'm just going to put a line there for my front. Following it along until, hello Midna, until I get to my side seam here. I'm going to put another mark there and pin it. Excuse the kitty. And then when I get down to my outer edge here, I'm going to put a line where my outer edge is here. And do they have a side and outside edge? No. Okay. So this is my sewing line basically. I'll put it dotted because, you know, that's the international symbol for sew here. And I'm going to put 5/8 outside of that is my new cutting line. Okay, so this is my sewing line and my cutting line. And I'm going to mark the other side the same. Actually, I can go ahead, line this up, and trim it on that new cutting line. Okay, so let me do that to the other side. Okay, so I know which side I'm going to sew on because that's where my little marks are. The side that I am not going to sew on, I need to trim. And they say trim into about 1/4 inch. Because I'm in the mood and I have them, I am going to do that with my pinks. And now this side that was just trimmed, I need to press it up towards the interfacing. And that's another good reason why I have the interfacing staggered like this, is because it makes things like this so much easier. So I'm going to go ahead and go press that, and I'll be right back. So once it was pressed, I went ahead and folded it over, and I folded it so that this pressed edge is slightly, you can see here, here's my interfacing, and there's a little gap here. I wanted this side slightly longer so that when I turn this, let me just trim this side a bit here, so that when I turn this and I'm coming back to sew this side, I may have to open this up a little bit on this side, but this will be longer, all right? And that should make it so that when I'm on this side, I can top stitch it and make sure I catch it. Okay, so I'm getting ready to sew this band on. So I have opened up the end a little bit because I need to be able to get in there with my machine and come down. And I'm going to be using the edge of my interfacing, which is fairly straight. I'm going to be using that as my stitch line guide. So I don't want to sew the interfacing, but I want to be, you know, just this side of it. And that way I should be able to get a nice fold. Alright, so I've got it sewn on all the way across, and you can see, like, here's my interfacing, and it's just next to the interfacing. And now it's time to get the band pressed down. Now, all of this seam allowance goes into the band, okay, all the way down here, and I might not even trim most of that because I kind of want a very, very substantial band right here, and I think having all of that stuff in there might actually help me. So let me just tuck all this into the side here. And remember, I made this side of my band just slightly wider, and so by doing that, it's going to come up just over all that stitching, okay? Okay, so I have it all folded up and it's covering my stitching line, and I want to be able to come back here and basically do a stitch in the ditch right in this seam all the way across and make sure it catches it. Alright, but I have a lot of bulk going on here. So just for my own sanity, so I can make sure everything goes the way I want to, I'm going to use some fusible bond, stitch witchery, and I'm just going to slide it in here and basically just fuse this in place. You do want to come back and actually stitch it, but this stuff is just going to keep it 100% where I want it to be, so that when I flip it over and I come back and stitch it, there aren't going to be any surprises. Alright, so I've got my stitch witchery on there, and look, it's not going to go anywhere. So now I can put this with the right side up on my sewing machine and carefully stitch down this stitch and have full confidence that I'm actually going to catch everything on this side. I got over to my machine and changed my mind. I want actually more of like a little top stitch to look, but I want to show you one of my presser feet. So it's actually on a spring, so this thing does go up and down. It's not going to hurt anything, but it makes it so that it can travel down a groove really easily for alignment. So let me put it on the machine and I'll show you how it works. After I used that tape on the rigilene, it did want to gum up my needle a little bit, so I just put a little bit of my thread lubricant on a scrap piece of fabric, which is basically silicone, and then I can rub that on my needle and it takes all of that gummy stickiness off, so we're good to go. Okay, so see if you can see, here's my little guide, and then I can just run that, because it's pushing down so it wants to go in that ditch, so it makes it just easier to guide all the way down. And it's not a necessity. I mean, honestly, all you really need in life is one of these, you know, but it's just fun. Alright, so that is what my top stitching looks like. On this side, I'm actually in between 1/8 and 1/4 because I had overlapped it and then I have it set in a little bit, but that's fine. I am plenty secure. Everything's going to be just fine, so yeah, I'm happy with that. And I am just going to take a couple quick seconds to neaten up the ends of my halter top straps. So I just open it up just a little bit, tuck these ends in, and fold it back closed. Just like that, and I'll just with a needle come around and stitch that closed so I have a nice neat little end. Now for this tie, on the instructions they actually have you leave an opening in the middle or part of it and close off the ends, so when you pull it right side out, the ends are already finished, which is good, and that way you're only trying to turn half of it at a time. I wasn't quite sure how long I wanted this to be. It looked a little long to me, so by doing it this way, I can kind of adjust the ends as I go. And I'm going to be stitching this bow on, so hopefully I will never have to unstitch it. So I'm using a bodkin. I'm just pulling it through that little opening in the stitching that we made. Pull it all the way through. And see how it goes. I want to take my time and make sure I get the knot so that it is, with the bow going the right direction and everything. So actually what I'm going to do is do a double knot first, okay? But I want to make sure that I turn my fabric out so my lining's not showing. So I did a single there. I'm going to come in and do another. Okay. So now my loop, my strips are going up and down again, all right? Plus that's not going to go anywhere. So now, hopefully, if I make a bow, it should stick out to the sides instead of up and down. And it does. It's kind of a large bow. So I'm going to take it in a little bit. And just play with it. I think that'll work. I'm going to go ahead and stitch this bow so that it will never come untied. And then once I have that done, I'm going to go ahead and close up the ends on my ties the exact same way. But that way I could clip them, and they actually turned out exactly even, great. But that way if they were uneven at this point, you could adjust that. Alright, so it's time to put our buttons and buttonholes on here. It looks like I'm supposed to put 2 buttons on the top and 2 buttons in the band. And so, remember I changed my center back to match where my size is. And this is the side that the buttonhole goes on, so that's handy. So I'm lining up this fold line with the top of my band and making sure that I have 5/8 sticking out here, which you do. And I have punched little holes in the very beginning and very ending of their buttonhole marks. So I'm going to go ahead and draw some little lines through the centers of those holes, up and down lines. And then I can come back, because I do mark everything, and I can come back and draw where my buttonhole is going to go. Okay, so that's the bottom one, and it's pretty much the same way on the top, except for there's not a fold line. I need to go ahead and I'm going to make these buttonholes on my treadle, on my buttonholer. And if you've never seen it, I have a separate video about my buttonholer, so I'm going to go do that really quick, and I will be right back. Okay, so last time we spoke, I was just going to run over to my treadle and make some buttonholes, and it has been actually almost 2 hours since that moment. Now, I did stop and get lunch, but the treadle said absolutely no way am I going to make buttonholes in that garment. I don't know. She's 112 years old, and I think that maybe she was just scandalized and horrified by the idea of a bikini top. So I ended up moving my buttonholer in here, and I used it on my backup Singer 15 machine. So, we got it done, but I just thought that was hilarious. So it is fairly thick down here, so I'm going to use my little chisel to cut my way through here. And once I get them cut, I want to kind of open it up a little bit, make sure there's no loose threads in there that are going to drive me crazy. So I pull all of that kind of stuff out and trim it up very carefully. And these are the buttons I'm going to use. They're vintage, which is my way of saying they are buttons that I have repurposed off of something else. I have boxes of shirt buttons that I really need to start using. So when you have it on, that's going to want to tug apart. So I'm actually going to place the buttons over towards the right side. So that's where I'm marking it. And this is the position for my buttonholes. So, for my buttons. So I'm just going to go ahead and sew these on by hand, nothing fancy, and I will be right back. Alright, this is her, and I think that she's cute. I actually tried it on a second ago, and she fits, and she's cute. Yeah, I haven't worn a bikini in so long, it was like shocking to me.